Charles Martel died in the mud near Poitiers on October 10th, 732, and the army that had never lost broke and ran with him. For most of a day, the Frankish infantry had held its dense wall of shields against the Umayyad horse, a discipline that had made the mayor of the palace the true master of Francia in all but name, governing in the name of the powerless Merovingian king Theuderic IV. But the cavalry of al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, Wali of Al-Andalus, did not tire and did not scatter. Charge after charge struck the same seam in the line until it split, and when Martel fell, the men around him did not close the gap. They fled north through the trees, and the field belonged to the governor from Cordoba. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened had that line not held, and why, in our own history, it did. What no one on that field could have known was that the man who broke the Franks had, in the same stroke, broken something far larger, something that would not fully surface for 300 years. The invaders had come a long road. Since Tariq ibn Ziyad landed in 701 and shattered the Visigoths at Guadalete, Iberia had become Al-Andalus, administered from Cordoba, under the distant authority of the Umayyad Caliph Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik in Damascus. Udo, Duke of Aquitaine, had already been beaten by Abd al-Rahman at the river Garonne earlier that same year, and it was Udo who had begged Martel for aid. Now both Duke and Mayor had failed, and there was no third army waiting behind them. With the only field army in the west scattered, Abd al-Rahman did not race blindly forward. He consolidated. Through the winter and the seasons that followed, his forces garrisoned the river towns of Aquitaine, secured the crossings, and turned the plunder of a raid into the machinery of an occupation. Udo, his authority hollowed by 2 defeats, held what fragments he could and bargained where he could not fight. Raiding columns pressed north toward the Loire, toward the rich abbeys of central Gaul whose treasuries had never needed walls. The monasteries that had expected a Frankish shield found none. Some paid, some burned. Slowly the tempo shifted from conquest to administration, and tax collectors began to follow the horsemen along the roads. North of the Loire, the house of Charles Martel turned on itself. His sons Carloman and Pepin the Short inherited not a realm but a quarrel over its shrinking remains. The office of the mayor of the palace had always been a thing of borrowed strength, resting on the conditional loyalty of regional dukes and counts who served the strong and abandoned the weak. Martel had been strong. His sons were disputed. As the brothers maneuvered against each other, those dukes read the season correctly and began to treat separately with the invaders, buying safety for their own lands rather than pooling it for a cause that no longer had a center. The mayoralty, once the engine that bound Francia together, became a title over a fracturing map. And the child who might have reunited it, the grandson history would have called Charlemagne, would be born, if born at all, into a world with no throne left to gather. The occupation carried its own fault line north with it. Much of the Andalusi army was Berber, and the Berber captains who now held the garrisons of Gaul had long resented the Arab governors who claimed the best land and the largest share. In 740, that resentment ignited across North Africa and Iberia in the Great Berber Revolt, and the fire did not stop at the Pyrenees. In the new northern garrisons, Berber commanders, the successors of men like Munuza, turned on their overlords or simply stopped obeying them. The single occupation split into competing zones, each answering to a different captain, each taxing and defending its own stretch of river. Abd al-Rahman's clean conquest dissolved into a patchwork of local powers, held together less by Damascus than by the fact that no one north of them could exploit the disorder. Then Damascus itself fell away. In 750, the Abbasid revolution overthrew the Umayyad dynasty and dragged the center of the Islamic world eastward toward the foundation of Baghdad. For the western holdings, Iberia, and now the scattered principalities of Gaul, this was not liberation but abandonment. Revenue, attention, and reinforcement flowed toward the east. The distant governors of the north were left to fend for themselves, drawing their legitimacy from local strength rather than any caliph's letter. What had begun as an arm of a Damascus expedition became a collection of self-sustaining Muslim lordships, rooted in the soil of Aquitaine and the Loire, no longer waiting for orders that would never come. In Rome, Pope Gregory III waited for a Frankish sword that would never be drawn. Pressed by the Lombards and estranged from the iconoclast emperors in Constantinople, the papacy had looked north for a protector strong enough to answer both. That protector lay dead near Poitiers, and his sons could not hold their own valleys, let alone Italy. So Rome learned other arts. It negotiated with the Lombards it had feared and reopened careful channels with a Byzantium it had nearly renounced. And across Gaul, the bishops made the hardest adjustment of all. They learned to petition Muslim governors for the safety of their sees, to seek in a tax receipt the protection they had once sought in a Frankish host. The papacy remained, but it now spoke for a faith without a temporal champion behind it. And then came the slow transformation that would remake ordinary life for millions. Across Aquitaine and the Loire lands, a mixed society settled into place, not overnight, but over generations. Christian communities kept their churches and their liturgy and paid the jizya, the tax levied on non-Muslims, and in exchange were left largely to their worship. Market towns swelled along the trade routes that now linked them to Cordoba and beyond it to the wider Andalusi world of goods and coin and learning. Conversion came not by the sword, but by the slow arithmetic of advantage among the ambitious who sought office, among the merchants who sought partners, among the taxed who weighed the cost of remaining. It was gradual, it was uneven. Whole valleys stayed Christian for centuries while their neighbors did not, and the border between faiths ran not along a river, but through families and market squares. 300 years on, Western Europe read as a gradient, not a border. From Iberia through Aquitaine and up along the Loire ran a belt of Muslim-administered principalities, semi-autonomous, quarrelsome, bound loosely by faith and trade rather than by any single throne. To the north and east, Christian lordships survived, smaller, poorer, wary, the shrunken heirs of a Frankish world that had lost its unifying office when Martel lost his life. Rome still crowned no emperor of the West, still spoke for a faith without a Frankish sword behind it, still negotiated where it had once commanded. There was no clean line where one world ended and another began, only the long friction of distance and revolt and administration, working itself out mile by mile. In our history, the Frankish line held that October afternoon, and a different Europe grew from the ground it kept. It is worth remembering how much of what came after rested on a single formation of tired men, standing on foot, refusing to break.